So welcome everybody who's just coming in. I went ahead and got started. I had no idea there was going to be a flood as soon as I did that. But I'm Beth Carroll, and we're rolling because I got a lot to cover. So one of the first things to think about when developing a cohesive compensation strategy is you have to understand where your company is in the business life cycle. You can't have a mature compensation plan, or you probably shouldn't have a really mature compensation plan if you're in the startup phase, because it's just going to crush you. You're not going to have the resources that you need to be able to manage that. You need a strong HR staff. You need a lot of processes and systems in place. Come on up front, there's plenty of room up here. Don't be shy. But at the same time, once you get to that level of maturity, it's not appropriate to have a compensation plan that is like what you had when you were a startup. There's a reason why companies evolve and become more sophisticated in terms of dealing with compensation as they grow. It's because they start to become more at risk for things like discrimination suits, and you have to segment your customers more, you have a lot more role definition, that really can make a difference in terms of how you're doing compensation. So if you look at this, it basically shows at a startup mode, there's very few roles, and compensation plans are typically pretty simple. They're usually either 100% variable, so everybody's on a commission, or it's 100% salary because management can't really figure out what to do with anything else, so they're just going to pay everybody a base salary and be done with it. As companies evolve, it starts to get a little bit more complex. Most of you, I wager, are probably in this bucket right here in terms of the growth mode. And that's where the crunch really starts to happen from a compensation perspective. You really start to see some of the problems coming up from how you started, but you're not really ready to be fully sophisticated in terms of your comp design with salary bands and job grades and all that kind of stuff. So this is the messy middle that you have to deal with, and you have to try to figure out how do you transition between that startup phase and then moving into the more sophisticated phase. Now, in terms of brokers, it tends to be variable all the way to sophisticated pretty quickly. They don't do a whole lot of the job grading stuff in the middle of it. With trucking companies, you have to live there almost from the beginning because you've got so many different roles and so many different facets that you have to deal with. You've got customer service reps, you've got load planners, you've got driver managers, you've got recruiters, you've got a whole bunch of different roles. On the broker side, it tends to be a lot more simple, so you don't have to deal with all that stuff at the beginning. So trucking companies start to have some of those salary bands and stuff earlier on than brokerage companies will. So wherever you start, you need to make sure you're proceeding in a particular order. So define your objectives. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Undertaking a compensation redesign process is not easy. That is one of the quickest ways to piss off your entire employee population that you can think of. So you better be sure you know why you're doing it. Otherwise, you're going to make people mad for no good reason. So what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Come on in, there's plenty of seats up here. What are the roles that you're dealing with? This is one thing that I've noticed that's really different between asset companies and brokerages. I spend an awful lot of time with my brokerage clients helping them figure out how they want to be organized. Do they want to be cradle to grave? Do they want to be split where they have one side focusing on shipper sales and another side focusing on carrier sales? Do they need to have a pure hunter role separated from a farmer role? With the trucking companies that I work with, there is practically no time spent on org design, none, because the roles are already set, right? You have CSRs, you have load planners, you have driver managers, you have recruiters, you have your accounting staff. You know, it's all pretty well set. There's not that many different ways you can organize it. Every now and then companies will play around with, is the load planner driver manager combined or the load planner CSR combined, that kind of thing. But otherwise, they're not that many different ways you can slice it and dice it. So in the trucking company world, that part is pretty easy. But you still have to be clear about what the performance expectations are. So that would be thinking about what constitutes good. It's amazing to me how many companies have never sat down to think about what makes a good employee versus an average employee versus a bad employee. You all know it instinctively in your gut, but you haven't really defined it. And if you as a leadership group haven't defined that, what that means for your people, how will they know what that means? And it makes it very easy when you undertake a compensation design process. You have to think about what constitutes good in order to be able to say, I'm going to pay one person more than another person for doing something. You have to be able to say, well, because of what, right? What did they do that was good? So a compensation design project helps you get through that discussion. How much should you be paying people? So what are the targeted pay levels? That's where surveys come into play, because they help you make sure that you're market competitive. You shouldn't be overpaying for a job, but you shouldn't be underpaying either. That's one of the big challenges I have with some of the brokerage clients that I work with, is they started in that startup mode where they're paying everybody variable compensation, sometimes as much as a 30% commission with no salary in play. It's a draw. And they think, okay, that's fine for forever. I don't have to worry about that ever again. They're always going to get 30%, and I'm happy with that because I'm getting my 70%. They're not going to be happy with that after management has now bought a new McLeod system and put that in place to make the job easier for the brokers, right? They're not getting their money back on that. Yes, they're still getting their 70%, but they've just made the job easier for the broker to do more for their 30%. So the only way you can recoup that is if you have a system where you can change that. Anybody in here ever had the conversation with anybody, sales rep, broker, anybody, where you were 30% and now we're going to take you to 25%? That's a fun conversation to have, isn't it? Yep. Let me ask the other question. Anybody here had a conversation with somebody to say, your goal last year was $1 million, but we expect 10% growth. Company-wide, we expect 10% growth, so your goal next year is going to be 1.1 million. Anybody had that conversation? Same conversation, but that second one is much easier, right? People accept that their goals are going to go up much more readily than they will accept that a commission rate is going to come down, even though mathematically it can be exactly the same. So keep that in mind. Select your performance measures. So what is it that you're going to be paying people for? You can only get 3 or 4 of them into the compensation plan. That's actually one thing I would say I've seen asset companies really blow. When they do incentive compensation design, I will often see lists of 20 different things that they want people measured on for a single role. Okay? It's too much. People can't handle it.
What's a KPI?
Key performance indicator. Excellent question. Yep. So it's just the things that you're measuring that matter to the business. So revenue, miles per day, trucks, active trucks per day, whatever it is that you're measuring.
Thank you.
Gross margin. Determine your mechanics. I'll get you a lot more details on that in a minute. Model the plans. You have to test them. If you don't test the plans, you are going to be dead in the water when you try to roll these things out. You have to know who it's going to affect. Is it going to affect somebody positively or negatively? How is it going to affect the economics of the company? Communicate the plans. So test them out with a small group first, and before you roll out to the whole organization. Reinforce. If you think it's a fix it and forget it process, I'm going to give you a hint. That's one of the 6 fatal mistakes, okay? It is not. You cannot do compensation design once and think you are done with it, all right? So it has to be something that you are continually reinforcing over and over again. People will nod during the rollout. Yep, I understand. They don't understand, okay? So you have to tell them over and over and over again. And then evaluate the plan effectiveness. Is it doing what you need it to do?